Welcome back to the Venomous Classic series, a series in which we take a look back at classic StarCraft 2 games, games that I think are worth revisiting, are extremely important to the fabric and history of StarCraft 2, and quite frankly feature my favorite players. This time we have an exceptionally exciting game between probably my two favorite pro gamers ever. We see on screen right now MorroW, formerly of Western Wolves and formerly of Team Property. He is the Swedish macro Terran player, and he's going to be facing off against the American legend, the macro machine, the Kraken, IdrA, my favorite player ever, the player who was last featured on my Venomous Classic series when he played an exciting best of 5 against the Korean Protoss Tester. Link will be in the description. And today we essentially have the tournament series that came right after IdrA vs Tester, which was the very first big tournament conducted in StarCraft 2 history. That is to say, the games that occurred when the game launched, not beta matches. And this is IM Cologne 2010. And IdrA is here in the top right, playing Zerg, of course, known for his macro play, and he will be facing off against MorroW. And a link to these games will be in the description. This is not an attempt to pirate the games or copy the games. Quite frankly, these games have very little demand in terms of viewer value in the current day. No one is really looking for these games, so to claim that I am sort of pirating these games or undercutting this channel is laughable. Link will be in the description, and I'm just paying homage to these games. I want to revisit them because not only are these two of my favorite pro gamers, but this is a series that had a ton of impact on StarCraft 2 history, and I know the quality is a little bad. There is no way, simply no way, I can improve it. These were recorded in 480p. This is the best I can do, because whenever a replay is recorded in a certain quality, you can't really up the quality retroactively 8 years later, and there's no way to view these replays organically because Blizzard has made it where the client can no longer even process replays this old. So this is the best I can do. Don't think that I'm trying to undercut these guys at IEM. Link will be in the description. Now that that's out of the way, we can finally get on to talking about the game, because in the bottom left, MorroW, the Swedish macro Terran, who quite frankly had one of the most entertaining streams through 2014 to about 2015, is in the bottom left, and he's playing on Xel'Naga Caverns, and he's facing off against the macro machine, my favorite player ever, IdrA, the brave American who back in the Brood War days dealt with culture shock, dealt with an insanely low win rate versus other top tier Korean pro gamers. This is the guy who went over to Korea back in Brood War when the Koreans were utterly dominant and lived in the CJ Intis and Istro house, grinding games out against quite simply very good players. And even though he was playing against B teamers and struggling, he stuck it out and pursued his dreams, and he is an inspiration for Americans. So IdrA, of course, will be in the top right, going Speedling Expand. He'll be facing off against a Reaper opening, as we see 2 additional barracks go down for MorroW. And if you're not aware of how the Reaper was in 2010, I don't blame you. Of course, all the way in Legacy of the Void, the current day, 2018, the Reaper is completely different, so let me fill you in. Back in 2010, at the beginning of Wings of Liberty, the Reaper was exceptionally powerful. Right out the gate, you had to have a tech lab to even make one, and it did a lot more damage, and it did an exceptional amount of damage against buildings, and I mean an insane amount of damage. I want to say it was like 30 damage per auto, and there wasn't an active grenade that you really screwed with. It was more of a, wow, the damage is just exceptional. And when I say the damage, I just mean the auto attack, like when you A move or you right click. The Reaper just did a disgusting amount of damage. Nowadays, the Reaper doesn't require a tech lab. We sort of see players open for the Reaper, make sure the Zerg isn't cheesing you, and go from there. Wasn't the case back in the day. We would very frequently see these Reaper openings, and MorroW has taken 2 gases. Looks like he's going to go for the 5 racks Reaper opening, which back in this day in 2010, which was of course so long ago, a time when the matchup was completely different. The queen had a repulsively low 3 range as a scan goes down, and MorroW sees the Roach opener for IdrA. So IdrA knows that MorroW is going to go for a Reaper opener. Now back in this day, Roaches had very short range, Queens had very short range, and on Xel'Naga Caverns this map was very wide open. It was very hard to spread creep out to your natural. We can see that IdrA has spread multiple tumors down already. And you could actually research an upgrade from the tech lab called Nitro Packs, which gave the Reapers an exceptional amount of range. And MorroW is going to go for this Reaper Abuse opener. Now it is very worth noting that the Reapers did an absurd amount of damage to buildings. So spine crawlers weren't really an option. They had 2 different kinds of auto attacks. The autos they did versus normal units, which of course did a lot of damage and shredded light units. And a completely different kind of attack, a different kind of grenade, as we see IdrA going for a surround here but failing, and not a single Reaper is going to be lost here for MorroW, but IdrA loses a plethora of lings, and it was extremely difficult for Zerg to deal with this Reaper opener, because you can see how quickly the Roaches and the Queens die here. The natural was just so wide open on Xel'Naga Caverns, you couldn't really deal with these Reapers in a sort of wall-off fashion where you'd put a couple Evos down and make Queens. You couldn't really make a bunch of Lings because they just shredded Lings. And you can see here that the Reapers are just eviscerating the Roaches, and wow, a ton of damage going down onto the hatch. And all it took was 1 volley here from the Reapers to really do substantial damage to that hatch. And we can see that not only did IdrA go for Speedling Expand early gas, a very safe build, but then he went right into Roaches, and I don't think MorroW has lost a single Reaper. And we can see here that despite the fact that IdrA did the absolutely safest opener, going right into Roaches after Speedling Expand and making just a plethora of units, he's going to lose that hatch and sort of nod his head in a backwards fashion in disgust as he thinks, what the hell am I supposed to do? I did the safest thing I could, Speedling Expand right into Roach, and just now MorroW is starting to lose a couple Reapers, but IdrA devastatingly has lost his expansion. MorroW already has his expansion up in his main base. He's going to float it out to his natural, as well as add on a couple more barracks. So back in this day, just like in the current day, the rule of thumb is, well, quite frankly, Zerg has to be a base ahead of their opponent. Zerg is this race that, of course, relies on multiple hatcheries to win games because all of their hatcheries produce units, and of course the Zerg race is reliant on hatcheries to produce units at a basic level, and the Reapers are going to sort of go in here puzzlingly, trying to snipe the hatch, and they might actually get it. IdrA is forced to cancel his halfway done hatch, and very irritably he's going to frown, cancel his hatch, and restart it. Now you might be thinking, wow, MorroW sort of just threw away his Reapers there. No, that's not really the case. MorroW already has his second base completed. He's already mining with a plethora of workers, probably about 14. IdrA's base has just now started, and that old adage, oh, Zerg really needs to be a base up, is sort of based off of the fact that Zerg produces all of their units out of the hatchery. IdrA loses his Overseer, sort of smiles in disgust there, as I'm so happy we have the IdrA cam here, because he's aware of the fact that MorroW is insanely far ahead, probably is about doubling his workers, has started +1, has started Marine and Marauder production, and back in this day, this game was much harder for Zerg. The Queen was awful as a defensive unit, had terrible air-to-air range, had terrible ground-to-ground range, a pathetic 3, as the Queen virtually had to be French kissing a ground unit to deflect it. Which you might be thinking, well, why doesn't the Zerg just do a heavy Queen opening? Well, it's because the Queen was pretty much just used to sort of inject, and really the Zerg would just get 1 extra Queen to creep spread, because unlike the current day, the Queen wasn't really this weird catch-all defensive unit that the Zerg could make a lot of and really defend very well. Now, of course, with 7 barracks out already, stim pack and the combat shield upgrade finishing, MorroW is going to go for a bio push here. Now with the 5 racks opener, MorroW heavily delayed his factory. He's already getting +1, but the most important things in this game are the upgrades. IdrA's Baneling speed is about halfway done. Here comes the engagement. Roach Bane on the way here for IdrA. All the Lings are dead for IdrA, and very frustratedly, IdrA's going to venture off of creep here. Let's see how MorroW can do. And this might sound weird, folks, but this is before the days of Marine splitting. It didn't really happen until GSL Season 2, very late into 2010, that Terran players figured out I can just split my Marines into a bunch of individual groups to micro against Banes. Bane speed just finishing here for Greg IdrA Fields. And the bio army is going to be virtually cleaned up, but with MorroW producing off of 7 racks and IdrA sort of in a position where he doesn't have a lot of tech, MorroW is going to easily be able to hold. And even though it looked like IdrA held off that push, I would say that he's still behind. The factory is already up for IdrA, or excuse me, for MorroW, the Swedish Terran. And the starport is on the way, and we see MorroW here starting a couple bunkers, starting a couple depots, and that wall-in is going to be essential to defending the wide open natural of Zelnog Caverns and IdrA GGs. So let's just talk about what happened there. After the extremely potent 5 racks opening, IdrA was behind in workers, he was behind in tech, he was in a position where he wasn't in a spot where he could tech to mutas. The 3rd on Zelnago is very hard to take. He didn't do any sort of worker damage, and in that position, IdrA was very behind. MorroW had stim, MorroW had combat shield, MorroW was about to have concussive shells, he was going to have +1, and MorroW goes ahead 1-0 in this best of 5, and just abused IdrA with the 5 racks Reaper opening, which of course a few months later would become nerfed. Blizzard sort of decided that it was very powerful and that the Nitro Packs upgrade, in addition to the exceptionally strong opener that was the multiple racks Reaper opener that did extra damage to buildings, it was too powerful, so they nerfed it. But back in this day, Zerg had a lot of tricky things to deal with. Double bunker block on the ramp, Blue Flame Hellions that did 10 extra damage to light units instead of 5. It was very, very difficult for Zerg back in this time. They didn't have a neutral depot at the bottom of the ramp to prevent against double bunker blocks, which were essentially an auto win. And if you watch my last Venomous Classic, you will be able to tell that IdrA lost 2 games against Tester because of the lack of the neutral depot. So now in this best of 5, IdrA will be facing off against MorroW again, of course. They're spawning close by air positions in Metalopolis, which isn't good for Zerg. It isn't bad for Zerg either, because IdrA could have spawned in the 3 o'clock versus 6 o'clock positions, close by ground positions, which of course would mean that MorroW was bottom middle. These were the positions that IdrA spawned in against IM MVP in GSL, and MVP took advantage of these positions and crushed IdrA with a powerful stim timing, very similar to the one that we saw IdrA defeat in the last game. Now in the last game, IdrA made a lot of banelings. He sort of ran off creep to defeat the bio push of MorroW. And although it looked kind of like, wow, IdrA held the push, he invested so much gas in banelings where it's debatable, but I think that he should have sort of held back, waited for MorroW to push all the way into his base, and then try to get the baneling connections. But MorroW's stim and combat shield timing hit before IdrA's baneling timing, because of course back in the day it was much easier to get to stim and combat shields off of a multiple barracks opener than it was to tech all the way up to lair as you were being harassed severely. And that little grin that we see on the face of our American macro hero is and when I say grin, I mean the opposite of grin. I mean frown, because IdrA knows that he's going to lose this first Overlord. This is just crushing And in the last game, MorroW of course went straight for Reaper, and if he would have done that in this game, IdrA would have been able to escape with his Overlord. Now of course he's going for his traditional Speedling Expand opener. MorroW is going for double gas. Now back in this day, Metalopolis was actually considered one of the better Zerg maps, and it looks like MorroW, despite opening Marine, is going to go into Reaper again, and he's going to go for a similar build as he adds 2 more barracks. So far it is a carbon copy of what we saw in Xel'Naga. Now this build isn't quite as strong as it is on Xel'Naga, because right around that gold base on Xel'Naga Caverns there is a cliff that you can jump up and down, and the natural is very open. Now the natural of course on Metalopolis is also very open, but because they spawn close by air, the ability to press on the weak side of IdrA's natural, MorroW sort of has to go all the way around. It's just not quite as good. Now that's not to say that it isn't still strong, as IdrA, holy shit, might lose another Overlord here. And he's opening for the exact same build, early roaches, because he knows that Reapers can just infinitely kite and shred Zerglings. And I do think that IdrA, thankfully for him, will be able to save this Overlord. And MorroW, oh of course, I love that. I love to see that. The very aggressive 5 racks opener for the Swedish Terran, as he's going to go for another mass Reaper play here. And probably the most important thing to note about this Reaper play is we see IdrA running up with Lings here, and of course the biggest strength of the Reaper, even 8 years later, is being able to jump up and down cliffs. So MorroW microed very intelligently there and completely avoided damage. Now the Reaper is very quick, especially with nitro packs, and it can sort of kite the Zergling ad nauseum, which means until you throw up, essentially. And IdrA knows that, so he's going for Roach. Now Zerg players never wanted to go for Roach. The Roach was considered a very poor unit with short range, very slow, and IdrA has already gotten layers, so he can sort of grab Roach speed early, because slow Roaches are just atrociously bad, and that even stands true until today. Roach speed is one of those upgrades that you quite simply just have to get. Now it is worth noting that anytime you were building a unit out of a barracks with the tech lab would roll up and appear green. This made it very difficult to sort of read what Terran was doing, because Zerg wouldn't be able to say, oh wow, the tech lab is green, I guess that means that he's researching something. No. Anytime he made units, the tech lab would glow up green. And of course the Overlord was significantly slower back in this day, as well as the Queen being worse. So IdrA's going to go for a surround here, and you can see quite frankly that the Lings just disappear. And all the Lings die for IdrA, but he gets 1 Reaper. But it's 5 racks Reaper here, and MorroW just has a plethora of Reapers, and with the Roach having a repugnant 3 range here, MorroW is going to be able to get the better end of this engagement, despite IdrA spending every little penny that he has. And the players, it sort of looks as though they're trading evenly here, but Zerg really wants to be making mass drones here, and IdrA is in a position where he quite simply has to be making Roaches to stay alive. MorroW has transitioned, he's going for Stim, he's going for the concussive shell upgrade on Marauders, which, just like in the current day of StarCraft, researches very quickly. And with 3 Marauders in his base, MorroW has halted production of the Reaper. MorroW realizes, well, IdrA has committed heavily to Roaches. This map isn't nearly as abusable as the other one, Xel'Naga. So I'm going to go into bio here. And again, MorroW has been making SCVs. He's made an expansion. So this isn't some sort of dim-witted, all-in coin flip play that MorroW's doing, despite the fact that it is very powerful for Zerg, and a couple months later would be judged as very imbalanced. MorroW, of course, is making Marauders, because Marauders do bonus damage to armored units. This is one of these things that has sort of stood the test of time of StarCraft, and is still true to this day. And I would suspect that he's going to be doing a Marauder push here as soon as Concussive Shells finishes. And IdrA's in a weird position here, because he's teching the Spire. He just wants to make pure drones until the Spire is done. The Sean account, of course, is IdrA, and he's making Lings because, of course, Marauders just decimate the armored roaches. So, similar to the Marauder Hellion build, MorroW has units here that counter both roaches and Lings, and he sort of backs off here as he does a couple scans, and he's hesitant, and he's going into Ghost here. So if you're not aware of why he's going into Ghost, Ghosts were exceptionally powerful here. Snipe not costing much energy and doing a flat 45 damage to any biological unit, which of course just guts any Zerg unit. And we saw this come into play against in the finals, which was Losira versus MMA back in I think it was like the 2011 GSL finals, where MMA went for a lot of Ghosts and just sniped all of Losira's units. But we're actually going to be seeing a very aggressive build here as the boys get pulled, and it's going to be sort of a SCV Marauder Reaper push here, as IdrA's going to push with anything as he successfully teched into mutas. And this is the problem with delaying your push, is MorroW went for a Ling Roach Buster build, and we can see that MorroW quite simply eviscerated the ground army of Greg IdrA Fields. But because IdrA was going for that macro play of Mutalist, IdrA was able to squeeze out some of those mutas because of MorroW delaying his push. And that means that because MorroW went for Marauders and Reapers, none of those things shoot up. And currently IdrA's in a position where he has a handful of units that can do some harassment damage to MorroW. And MorroW's in this weird spot where he has a ton of barracks with Tech Lab, and he's not really able to adequately produce Marines. He doesn't have any turrets, and he's going Ghost here, which is a very peculiar play. He gets a couple snipes off, and IdrA only has a few mutas. Now remember, IdrA is very low econ in this situation, but MorroW doesn't have a factory, and he's probably going to look to get up some turrets here. But the fact that IdrA has squeezed some mutas out that's a very good thing for him. IdrA, of course, is known as a macro player that excels best when he can force his opponent to multitask. So despite the fact that MorroW is a very good player himself, he went for this big aggressive push that delayed his tech that didn't really work out. He hit right as IdrA's mutas came out, sort of an anti-timing. And now the only units that MorroW has that can deal with the mutas are the Ghosts. He has a handful of Marines here, and IdrA's doing some harassment. But MorroW is trying to get turrets up. IdrA very intelligently snipes off the SCVs, and you can see that the Ghosts do a ton of damage there, sniping off a couple of the critical mutas. And back in Wings of Liberty, the Mutalist did not have a passive HP regeneration ability, so this means that anytime IdrA takes damage to his mutas, it's a big deal. And MorroW, it looks like he's going to do a big push with Ghost, Marines, and Marauders. Doesn't have any medevacs, of course, because he delayed his tech going for that big Marauder push. And had MorroW just done that big Marauder push right as his stim finished, he might have been able to kill IdrA. But as it stands, he has about a dozen Marines, some Ghosts, some Marauders. Here comes Greg IdrA Fields screaming forward. The Bane's coming out and just doing substantial damage to everything that can shoot up. Great micro there from IdrA, as the average player would have just crashed the Marauders, or excuse me, crashed their Banelings into Marauders. Might be saying, well, who would do that? Well, back in 2010, you would often see players pretty much just A-moving everything, very desperate to just get all the units attacking at once, because people didn't even really hotkey eggs in this time. They were back in the Brood War mindset of they would just mass produce units and hotkey them as they came out. So to see IdrA move command all of his Banelings there on his beautiful creep spread to take out all of the money units was a huge deal. Very, very crisp micro there coming out from the American macro Zerg. And the fact that he got enough speed Banelings out in preparation for the push, he didn't just mindlessly make a bunch of mutas, also shows his discipline. And he's going to go for the throat here, as MorroW does a nice little focus fire onto the Banes. But at this point, MorroW has lost all of his units. His barracks heavy opener into Ghost cost him, and Greg IdrA Fields is going to take the match. Back in a time where Reapers were considered imbalanced, we're going to go right into Game 3 here, as MorroW and IdrA are tied 1-1. And as you can see, I can't do a quality upgrade here. This is quite simply as good as it gets in terms of quality. There we see IdrA circa 2010, before he started lifting weights, before he grew his beard out, but after he dropped the Harry Potter glasses and the CJ Entis jersey, or I should say jacket rather. Nice shot of the crowd there as I take a sip of my soda. And MorroW there, Bonkers, one of my favorite streamers, an intelligent guy, a funny guy, someone who in 2018 plays poker on a professional level. Quite frankly, a paragon of the StarCraft 2 scene in his day, a guy who contributed endless hours to the scene, who tried very hard to become the best, and was someone who was very entertaining to watch and held it down in terms of StarCraft 2 live streams, especially after IdrA left. IdrA, of course, retired in 2013 after his series lost to Polt. After that happened, there was a vacuum left in the StarCraft 2 streaming scene, and MorroW sort of picked up that torch and said, I'm going to make Bonkers and give the Protoss an IQ test. That is the best Swedish accent I can do off the top. Haven't heard MorroW's voice in over a year, but it's okay because he's about to jump in match 3 against IdrA here. So it is important to note that both players have gone for the same sort of opening here. MorroW going for a 5-Rax Reaper opener, an opener that is very powerful in the early game, an opener that is extraordinarily powerful against a hatchery first player, an opener that is very abusive and punishing and crushing against someone who doesn't make a lot of units. IdrA has responded perfectly both times with a safe opener into quick roaches into a mass roach opener that is pretty much the safest thing you could do back in the day. And IdrA sort of has earned this reputation as a guy who always tries to macro and play a straight up style, and he's earned that reputation fairly, but he's sort of been falsely branded as like a greedy player, someone who just always does the macro opener blindly. And we can see that in this series, in addition to his series against Tester. It actually turns out that he does very safe builds. He does builds that allow him to be safe in the early game and get a very early speedling upgrade. And he's not just a guy that fast expands blindly every single time. And once again, we see IdrA going for a speedling opener upgrade, an upgrade that of course allows you to be sort of safe in the early game. And safe is a relative term back in 2010. Terran had double bunker block 2 racks at the bottom of the ramp. They had Blue Flame Hellions. They had Cloaked Banshees that you couldn't scout really because of the lack of Overlord speed. They had Reaper openings. It was much harder to play Zerg back in this day. And Terran had a lot of aggressive options that they could do early on in the game. And I'm very interested to see what MorroW does here as he goes for a tech lab. And I haven't seen these games in probably 4 years. I've actually had quite a few people accuse me in the past of, oh, you watch all these replays beforehand and then pretend to have prophetic visions. No, that's not the case. I pretty much always watch these replays fresh, and if I don't, I state so at the beginning of the match. Now, obviously, I know that this match is worth watching because it's part of the Venomous Classic series, but quite frankly, I casted these games because it was the next step in the career diary of Gegridger Fields. Right after the StarCraft 2 King of the Beta tournament that Sean Day 9 Plot hosted. This was sort of the first premier tournament that we saw once the game was released. And MorroW is going to go for another Reaper opener. Now it will be interesting to see whether or not he goes for multi-racks. And for whatever perplexing reason, the casters never use the production tab here as it is multi-racks. Very infuriating to try to cast from these old VODs. I don't know if the casters are trying to be cute or keep the suspense going, but very frequently they just wouldn't use really any of the tabs, and it made casting pain in the ass. So we can see here that MorroW checks the natural, doesn't find anything, And Greg IdrA Fields very intelligently, after walking his drone out there, knew that that was going to happen and elect to hide the drone instead of just forcing the hatchery, letting MorroW scout it, and letting his building hatchery become under peril of the Reaper grenades. Now, these aren't the Reaper grenades that you know of now that you throw on the ground that bounce units up. No. These were Reaper grenades that did extra damage to structures and quite frankly were absurd. And it is the same 3 racks opener from MorroW, and this is intelligent. Instead of just making a bunch of Reapers, MorroW has elected to get a Marine in both games 2 and 3. This is extraordinarily important because denying scouting from Zerg can't be understated. Back in this day especially, Zerg was very worried about what Terran was going to do. Very frequently it was, is he going Cloak Banshee? I'm very scared that he's going Cloak Banshee, because you had to get an evolution chamber to get a Spore Crawler back in this time. And with these builds like this Mass Reaper opening, and of course the Queen being worse, as I've said before, the Terran players were in a position where if they went Cloak Banshee and caught the Zerg off guard, it would just be devastating. Because if you fly into the Zerg's base with 2 Banshees, and they don't have a Spore, well, that means they don't have an Evo, most likely, because you can't really afford to get an Evo when you're going 2 base Roach off of 23 drones. You can't afford to just get an Evo and make 2 blind spines, because first of all, 2 blind spines versus multi-racks Reaper is terrible and will get you killed. Second of all, it puts you in a position where you're way behind if Terran does any other build. So Terran was in a position here back in this day where they could sort of scare Zerg badly if they could just prevent them from scouting, and that 1 Marine really does the trick. And we can see that MorroW has more Reapers than Queens, Lings, and Roaches combined here for IdrA, which is very scary. And on this map, Blistering Sands, it is very difficult to defend. Not as difficult as like a Zelnaga, of course. The natural is much more sort of constricted, and we can see all it takes is like 3 shots for Morrow to do a ton of damage. IdrA's going to go in for the surround here, and all the Lings just melt. And this is what I was talking about here, is the Reapers just shred Lings. And IdrA was in a position where he got a full surround, but it didn't matter. And these Roaches are okay on creep, and a total joke off of creep, because of course they had 3 range, and Roaches without speed are god-awful. And we can see that MorroW just has to execute basic kiting micro here to obliterate the Lings, and he's already expanded at home, and IdrA is in a position where he just has to keep making units. Zerg, of course, is a race that you have to make a binary choice between units that attack or drones, because everything comes out of the hatch. And we can see here that IdrA is pulling ahead, and when I say pulling ahead, I mean losing badly, because it's actually MorroW that's pulling ahead. He's teching up. He already has another base. It looks like again he's going to go for extra barracks instead of a factory. Now IdrA does manage to pick off a Reaper or 2. We can see that MorroW is actually trading somewhat effectively. IdrA's Roach speed is about to be done, which is cute, but Roaches are not that good against Terran. You sort of get in this spot where you make enough Roaches to be in a position where you can sort of hold the Reapers, but once Terran starts to do anything, whether it be a Marauder bio push or a tank push or Banshees or just standard bio with medevac play, you're behind, because Roaches don't really do well into any of that, and MorroW is sort of poking in and out. Now there's significantly less places to poke and prod on Blistering Sands, and we can see MorroW is taking his natural expansion intelligently. IdrA has killed a handful of Reapers here, as there are just a few more Reapers than there are Roaches. But IdrA is not doing very well on the macro front. Doesn't have upgrades, doesn't really have tech. He just now put down a Baneling Nest. MorroW, of course, has started his production of Marauders and Marines. You might be saying, well, why is IdrA behind? Well, it's because Zerg really always has to be 1 base ahead. It's 2 base versus 2 base, IdrA is scared that he could die at any time, and here we see a lot of damage. Oh my god! As basically one volley of the Reaper grenades pretty much killed the Baneling Nest there as it went down to 50 HP. IdrA has to completely cancel, lose about 30 seconds worth of development there as the Baneling Nest was about 70% done. He has to completely restart it, and MorroW really just lost a couple Reapers, which he doesn't care that much about. Really the only thing MorroW has to do is not be a total moron and fight just heads up Reapers into roaches and lose everything. Because if MorroW just continues to mass up units and hit a timing here off of 7 racks, IdrA's not really going to have the units to deal with it. As IdrA wants to go for a roach flank here, as IdrA knew what was going on, but roaches are not that fast, have very slow speed, and despite the fact that he threw that flank into motion, as a huge Ling flank comes in here, as IdrA again goes for 2 big flanks, but a big Roach Marine force counters IdrA's Roach Ling force. Most of the Lings die very quickly. Marauder's kiting back here from MorroW. He stims again, and IdrA knows that he's going to be unable to take on this force. Now, Bane's speed is going to be very, very slow as IdrA's Bane Nest is probably just now finishing. Roach Ling attacking here for IdrA, but MorroW is just kiting back beautifully here, and the Roaches and the Marines are very strong against the Marauders and the Marines, are just exceptionally powerful against the Roach Ling, as MorroW can just continue to kite back with his concussive shells. Once the Lings are shaved off, he can brutalize IdrA. Marauders versus Roaches, and IdrA's in the spot where he's sort of hesitant. He says, okay, I guess I'll just sort of try to take a third, but it's blistering sand, so he can't really take a third in an effective spot, as that gold base in the bottom right is very pushable, as is the middle base in the 12 o'clock position, which is essentially closer to MorroW than it is IdrA. And the towers here are very powerful for the aggressive player. Remember, there were no lurkers or ravagers back in this day, so when IdrA makes a big army of roaches, he's just sort of stuck with roaches. And we can see a starport on the way here for MorroW, as well as +1 and a third base. IdrA's third base is down as well in the bottom right position. Now, oddly, he's elected to choose the normal base instead of the gold base, which of course has rocks, which is very difficult for Zerg to deal with. And MorroW sends a couple SCVs down here to scout. He sees that IdrA does in fact have a third coming up, and Roaches, Banes, and Lings are out here. Big stem for MorroW, just takes a couple shots, and he knows IdrA's going to try to defend it, and he backs off. IdrA's base is at about 75% life. MorroW knows that once he gets medevacs, he will be at an exceptional advantage. The back rocks are still up here for MorroW, which makes attacking a little bit harder and defending a lot easier. And he's going to make 2 bunkers here. So this is a very smart move, because these 2 bunkers sort of are in a spot where he knows that anytime IdrA is going to try to engage from his third base, either into MorroW's natural main or third, he's going to have to go through. So these bunkers are a great idea, especially against roaches, because roaches are just terrible at breaking bunkers. Big SCV transfer here for MorroW as he starts to take his third, and again Zerg needs to be a base ahead, so IdrA is behind. And IdrA is trying to tech up into Hive here. He has an infestation pit, of course. He is making a couple spawns. But against this many Marauders, spines won't do much. MorroW has started to get tanks up. Infestors are out for IdrA. But IdrA's in sort of a weird position where he wants to be defending, but MorroW can sort of breathe down his neck and prevent him from safely droning. A benefit, of course, of the very small maps. And the third base is in a weird spot. A nice little droopy drop here for MorroW. He gets the second evolution chamber. IdrA gets a fungal off. He gets a couple infested Terran. And it looks like one of the empty dropships will die, as will the other. but both of them, of course, were empty, so it doesn't matter that much. And MorroW can get double medevacs on the way. Lots of bans for IdrA here, so he might be looking to hit a timing as 2 bunkers are out for MorroW. Very intelligently, two supply depots placed in the way. Multiple siege tanks out here for MorroW, and IdrA is not breaching that. And that is what I was talking about. When you put 2 bunkers out there, in addition to 2 supply depots to sponge hits, it is so hard for Zerg to run through with a ground army. And once you have more than 2 siege tanks, wow, it's almost impossible to breach. With the planetary fortress on the top side, there is no counterattack that IdrA can do that is going to be able to breach that. So MorroW is playing Blistering Sands perfectly here. IdrA has made the dreaded Wings of Liberty era infestor, which people did not really realize was imbalanced until 2012. Of course, back in this day, the maps were so small where you were almost in a position where you couldn't really take enough bases to make a lot of infestors. But I digress. MorroW has his tank at a beautiful spot right at the base of that plateau with a tower on it. Makes it very hard for IdrA to engage. IdrA trying to tech up into ultras, but with +2 carapace on the way, it is still going to be very hard for IdrA to do anything. One of his evolution chambers has been killed. He doesn't have a ton of income. The Terran, of course, with mules is going to have him outdone in the income. And the Terran can sort of siege up in these choke pointed positions and pressure IdrA's bases. A brutal forward siege tanks here. A beautiful fungal going onto the entire army of MorroW as Ling Bane comes screaming forward here with the Roach complement as well as an Ultra. Will IdrA be able to do it? I don't think so, as the siege tank army of MorroW is going to clean up the army of IdrA, and IdrA did lose that base, and he did build his Ultraless Cavern way down there at the 3rd. Chitinous plating doesn't finish, and IdrA sort of has that look of disgust on his face as though he's about to say the phrase, StarCraft 2 is fucking stupid, or Terran Micro is fucking silly. And quite honestly, I don't know if IdrA's going to be able to win this game. He doesn't have units that shoot up. His new 3rd base just finished. It's going to be in perpetual peril. Remember that MorroW built a 4th base right up at the top there, and he's going to be able to easily take a PF base right up in the middle there on a very, very defensible position. And MorroW will just be able to continuously pressure IdrA, although he has not cleared that Overlord there spewing creep. And Ultras are out, but without anything to shoot up, Ultras aren't that good. Now, Ultras might seem sort of like the scary invincible unit, but if you don't have anything that can shoot up, you just sort of drop Ultras into oblivion. These aren't Legacy of the Void Ultras. They aren't Heart of the Swarm Ultras. They're Wings of Liberty Ultras, which were way worse. Normally in Wings of Liberty we saw players opt for sort of a Broodlord mix, probably with Infestors. Of course on this map and on other maps in Season 1 and 2, like Steps of War, Kulash Ravine, this was way harder to pull off, as we see a great example of why that is, as MorroW sets up 2 bunkers which block a critical juncture of the map for IdrA. IdrA running forward with Ultra Infestor, and he's in a position where off of creep, even when he gets big fungals like that, it's not really that much of an issue. MorroW tries to salvage, but IdrA is sort of petering out here. He's running out of money. Tons of Marauders just ripping through the Ultras. Marauders, of course, do bonus damage to Ultras, and IdrA GG's and goes down 3-1 in the series. So we're going into our final game here in beautiful 480p, as IdrA's sort of thinking, okay, well, I lost on 2 smaller maps, and oh shit, it is the smallest of smallest maps, as Steps of War is going to be map number 4, and for IdrA this is going to be very difficult, because this is often considered one of the most, and I mean the most difficult maps for Zerg to face off against, because if we think about the array of options MorroW has, he can go double barracks in his base, which the map is so short that it's essentially like proxying multiple barracks at IdrA's 3rd, so there's really no need to even proxy. And then he can do a bunker rush because there is no sort of neutral rock, so neutral depot at the base of the ramp for IdrA. And that means that IdrA is in a position where he can just be obliterated by a cheesy rush. MorroW can go for the same build he's done in all 3 games with the Reapers. And because IdrA's natural is sort of on this big plateau, IdrA's not going to be in a position where he can easily defend. MorroW could go for a tank push that sieges right at the base of the plateau of IdrA, which again will be nearly impossible to defend. Or he can just go for Banshee, which if IdrA doesn't scout it, is auto good game. So being down 2-1 in this best of 5, IdrA is going to opt for a safe opener here on Steps of War. And I'm very interested to see what IdrA does, because in the true spirit of 2010, MorroW doesn't really wall off properly here, which is sort of interesting because had IdrA gone for like a 6-pool rush, which if you don't know what a 6-pool is, sort of like the quintessential early game Zerg rush where you don't make any drones, you just straight up make a pool and then do a slow Zergling rush. Of course, in Legacy of the Void, very peculiarly for new players, 6-pool doesn't really exist. You start with 12 workers and that sort of puts you in a position where it's like, well, I already have enough workers as sort of macro here. So with that being said, IdrA tried the drone scout and his drone was butchered despite the fact that MorroW didn't wall in and he didn't see MorroW's gas timing, so this really sucks for IdrA. He probably is worried about multiple racks Reaper here, and he doesn't see jack shit. So this could be rack CC, this could be 2 factory Hellion, this could be double gas 2-port Banshee, this could be 6 racks Marine SCV all in, this could be 2 racks bunker rush. That's the point, is it is just so hard to figure out what Terran is doing. Overlords are way slower, Queens are way worse, wall-ins prevent any sort of scouting. IdrA is just in a terrible position, and if you just sort of boil things down to their core, this is part of what made Zerg struggle in the early days of StarCraft 2, is it was hard to scout Terran. Now IdrA is going for an expansion here, and for the first time all game, MorroW has not elected to go multi-racks. He has elected to go for a quick factory and a barracks with another tech lab. So if I had to guess, this is going to be a Marauder Hellion all-in. Now the gist of a Marauder Hellion all-in is that, well, Marauders are exceptionally powerful against Roaches, which is what you force Zerg to do if there is a Reaper build, or quite frankly, if there is a Hellion build. And of course, the fact that there is a little green whirling motion on the tech lab doesn't mean anything, because whenever you made units back in this time, it just showed the green whirling motion. It didn't necessarily mean there was upgrade on the way. And even if there was an upgrade on the way, IdrA would think, oh, I guess it's Nitro Packs, that Reaper speed upgrade that they got rid of. Actually, no, it's Marauders. And MorroW did an exceptional job of hiding the fact that it was Marauders. And suddenly IdrA's in a position where he probably thinks, well, shit, I saw a barracks making stuff and I saw another barracks making stuff. I guess it's Reaper. Oh crap, there's a Hellion. Well, he at least has a factory. I don't know if it's reactor. And again, IdrA is in a very tough position because not only does he not know what MorroW is doing, MorroW can push across the map and be at IdrA's front door before IdrA can even make Zerglings, because it's Steps of War. If you've never played Steps of War, I urge you highly to go into a custom game with your friends and play a Zerg versus Terran in Wings of Liberty mode on Steps of War. It's exceptionally difficult. And we can see here MorroW is pulling the boys. He's saying screw it, he's only taken 1 gas. And, oh, IdrA saw the tail end of that there. But look at that, he's already at his base! Holy crap! Like on the same screen, we saw the SCVs leave and the Hellions arrive. That's how freaking small Steps is. So, MorroW is going to lead with his linebackers. Of course, linebackers are SCVs back in this day when they had 60 HP, and suddenly IdrA with 1 spine and a ton of Zerglings, it's not going to mean anything as Hellions just eviscerate the Lings. And look at that, the SCVs simply tank the Zerglings out, and that one huge volley the Hellions got off is going to be enough. The Marauders, of course, do phenomenal damage to the Spinecrawler Queen, and MorroW wins. So if you thought I was a total IdrA fanboy, well, honestly, you're a little bit right. But if you thought I only casted IdrA's wins, you're wrong. I would urge you to go back and look at a Heart of the Swarm game I casted between him and Desro. There's an old name for you, the Panda Toss. But MorroW wins. He takes it all. He sort of says, holy crap, I just beat one of the best foreigners in Brood War history. Wow. And Take, circa 2010, comes up to him and shakes his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed these Venomous Classics, these throwback games, make sure you subscribe for more, and I urge you to go view the source of the recording, which will be in the description. Have a nice day.